You don't need 100 members. You can have 10. Start with the 10. Do something meaningful. Get some wins out of it. And once they're comfortable and you're rolling along, then bring in another few and another few. So it isn't clickbaiting. It's better to have something small with 10 companies or people or stakeholders that get something meaningful out of it rather than having something too big.
Hello and welcome to the Partnerships podcast series by UIN. I'm Madeleine Arkins, Project Officer and your host for today. In this episode, we are joined by Frances Hardiman, who leads Engineering the Southeast, an industry-led cluster in Ireland. She will share how her team built strong connections across the triple helix, the key success factors behind effective collaboration, and why we should continue celebrating the small wins. I'm delighted to speak to Frances Hardiman today about the learnings from this specific cluster approach. To give a quick intro to Frances, she is the head of Faculty of Engineering and Built Environment at Southeast Technological University, SETU, previously head of faculty at IT Carlow, and she has a background in engineering. Frances, thanks so much for joining today.
Thank you. Lovely to be here.
Maybe to start us off, Frances, could you tell us a bit, for the uninitiated, about your role as head of faculty and at the university and how it connects to your work with external stakeholders?
Thank you, Madeleine. As head of faculty, we've quite a significant faculty here within SETU, and the faculty, as you said, is engineering and built environment. So it's quite comprehensive. There's a lot of departments here. And for me and my role, partly is strategic development of the faculty itself. It's supporting an operations side, working with the university in terms of governance and the executive management team, but also then strategically externally. I spend a lot of time external to the university. That can be part of working with government in terms of national policy and developing policy, but also working with industry and working with the sector regional here to us within the Southeast. For me, this is engineering, and we are driving engineering. We're looking to support industry and their upskilling. We're looking to support new sectors that want to come to the region. So, for example, here in Ireland, we might have our development agency here, the IDA, will have new companies that want to come into the region, and they want us to help support on selling the region, what's on offer here, what we can do in terms of education, what we can do, and how we work with local industry as well, and that supply chain. And I would have colleagues similar here. It would be common to executive colleagues here to work external to the university and represent the university on a wider scale. And with that in mind, I also chair the heads of engineering group, if you like, across the technological university sector. So it's about sharing best practice and supporting each other as we navigate the landscape of higher education through a changing world at the moment. So lots of different assets, and that's what brought my interest to the cluster.
Yeah, it's interesting as a head of faculty also, because I think on the first seeing the name, you immediately see it as more, as you said, an operations internal role, but that you really take an outward facing approach obviously speaks to your interest in this kind of cluster approach. Bringing us on to the topic at hand, the Engineering the Southeast cluster. Could you tell us about its mission, its key objectives, maybe how it came to be?
So Engineering the Southeast as a cluster, where it started was there was a call in Ireland a few years back to advance clustering within Ireland, and there was funding, and the funding came from a body called Enterprise Ireland, and 13 clusters were funded under a call called the Regional Technology Clustering Fund. And the key thing was these clusters had to be embedded in an educational sector. So it was embedded within the college, but they had to be industry based and industry driven, because Enterprise Ireland is all about industry. And of the 13, Engineering Southeast was one of those. So a call came out and we put the call forward for that. In developing the cluster, you will hear from the name, Engineering the Southeast is about engineering in the southeast of Ireland, and it's to drive engineering down here in the southeast. There are other clusters that have been developed to be very specific in terms of domain areas. So there'll be a cluster called Cyber Ireland, for example, that focuses on cybersecurity. There'll be another one called Agritech Ireland that focuses on the agricultural technology side. So the cluster can be discipline specific or regional specific. And we decided to be regional specific. My interest was, when I joined the college at the time, was what is the sector look like here? Is it predominantly precision engineering? Is it pharmaceutical engineering? What is the sector? What does it look like? What's the ambition? What's missing? What's needed? And so on. Working with different partners, the Southeast Energy, our Regional Skills Forum here in the Southeast, and different, the IDA and Enterprise Ireland and different bodies, we formed this cluster together and then formed a steering group. And from that, in the early days, asked those questions: what do we need? What's an issue here? What's a deficit here? And we found the skills come up as a core area. But that's how it started. So it's one of 13 and it's funded. And that's an important thing, that it's had 5 years funding, and we've just secured 2 years funding as well from Enterprise Ireland.
Yeah, fabulous. Just out of curiosity, do you have much contact with the other 12 clusters? Is there a kind of community of practice going on there?
There is. So the connection mainly works through, for example, for me, I'm what we call a principal investigator of the cluster. So I would manage and handle the contract of the cluster, if you like. But all the clusters have an educational and outreach manager, or we can also term a cluster manager, if you like, but they are an educational outreach manager. And those 13 connect. So I have to give good credit to Enterprise Ireland at the time, because it was new and it was something we wanted to explore, and we wanted to, I suppose share common practice and best practice amongst the clusters. The actual people that run the cluster themselves, they connect often and frequently. And that has been facilitated by Enterprise Ireland. They had a dedicated resource that would pull them together, have one-to-one, but also shared meetings. And that has been a massive benefit, because you can talk about the pros and the cons. It works, but it also doesn't work. So there's a lot of work there. And I would connect in then with the principal investigators then from a university perspective about, it's maybe securing more funding, or where is it going from a policy perspective, what's happening from an Irish context in terms of clustering. But yes, we are connected. And I think that's important. That's what's really helped over the last 5 years in the success of the clusters.
Nice. Maybe to zoom out a little bit, because as you said, clusters are quite prevalent in Ireland, but of course their meaning can be different across regions and across contexts. How would you define a cluster in this context?
The key thing about a cluster is that it is more than a network, and it's more than a group, and it can be confusing. There was a clear definition in terms of clustering, even when we went for the application. So the key thing is the triple helix, that there is an educational body, there's a government agency, and there's industry. So there's three parties to this. And with that, we have a steering group, and there's a clear direction for the cluster. You're working towards a goal. It is funded, and as I say, it's well managed, and it is managed. In terms of funding, sustainability, and so on, you can have members, the same as any other network. You can join, you can have a membership, and so on. And that's because we want to be a self-sustaining cluster going forward. But the key thing is that the three agencies are involved in it. And that was a core criteria when we applied for the funding for a cluster. Without three, you wouldn't have gotten funding. You were seen as a network. You were seen as a group. So there's a formality to it. There's a contract with it in terms of the funding. There are metrics and KPIs and so on with it that we have to feed back on. And that gives it accountability as well as an entity, if you like. By connecting it in with the university, it is not a company. It's not seen as that. It's connected in with the organization in terms of we can bring due diligence in how it runs and how it operates. And we make sure that the finances are done well, and we're keeping our house in order, basically, in terms of the cluster. But you will hear the word being used in particular areas. For example, you can go to the northeast of England and you will see a cluster around offshore. There's clusters forming, but there's usually multiple stakeholders, and there's a mission. There's a reason for the cluster. There's an economic reason, or it's a regional focus, more so than let's network with each other. We officially collaborate with each other and take competitors that do not sit in the same room to come together, to work together for a regional focus, a regional goal, as opposed to let's have some drinks. There's more to it than the networking side, from my perspective, and from the perspective of the funding body as well.
And would you say that this mix of obviously the networking perspective and the more like contractual arrangements that are put out in the beginning, is that what makes it a more effective tool for leveraging both regional and institutional strengths? Is there one key ingredient there? That's a hard question to answer. We'll put it down to one.
The formality helps, because I think when you're going out to develop a cluster and you're looking to get industry engaged and you're looking to get stakeholders, okay, and we've quite an eclectic mix of stakeholders. There's a lot of agencies involved. And when you're leveraging, you have to come with credibility, okay? So that's important, that it's come with credibility, that it's something that is organized, it is something that is formal, and we're going to do this. Because we can be a member of lots of different things, okay? We can be a member of different organizations and so on. So you are competing with that. In a sense, you are bringing something of value. That's something we talk about quite a bit, is how is this adding value to the person involved or to the region and so on. So I think formality helps. I think it being funded helps. And it is networking. Yes, we are looking for people to connect and so on. But I just feel that it's a bit more than that, or there's a deeper mission to that. There's a little bit, if you're in, there's a little bit of that. You join and there's a mission here and we want you to be part of that. And of course, there's different levels to that. Some people are 2 feet in and they're very much involved. Others are on the periphery, and that's absolutely fine, because it has to be fluid. It has to be fluid to a certain degree. But I think it's that formality that gives it another level, if you like, in terms of how it performs.
Yeah, I'm following. And then we've touched on this already in terms of the principal investigators and the cluster managers. How does the cluster work in practice? How have you engaged industry and these eclectic mix of stakeholders in shaping the cluster? Is it well, this is
Yeah.
also a question. Do you think it's an iterative process as the
Mhm.
funding has gone on?
I think at the start, it was very important to not be overly prescriptive, but to take your time with it. It was to relax a small bit. So when we met first, I remember the group was meeting, is even where will we meet? Where will we have the first workshop to bring people
Yeah.
together? Because it's across a region of different counties. If we go to this county, it might be focused on this. If we go to that county, it could be focused on that. So there's a bit of thought in a sense of how do we give a regional approach and how do we get people involved? So it starts off with developing what's the focus, what's the point of it, and getting buy-in at the start and having clear pillars. So we identified at the start the industry needs. It wasn't my need, it was the industry need. It was first and foremost developed for industry. And three things came to mind at the start. And this is the pain or pinch points for industry is we need sufficient talent in our region to grow our companies in our industry. We just don't have it. When I'm looking for people, I can't find them local. When I'm looking for highly technical engineers in this case, it's such a competitive market. They're leaving the region and I can't compete with that. So we need to grow more. We need to do more. We need to get more people into the sector. So that was a real need that came out day one, if you like. How can this cluster do that for us? Another one that came forward was if we're going to be upskilling, industry might say, yes, there's loads of college programs, but there's nothing specifically for what we need and what we want right now. I know you've got your degree programs, but this is what we need. Okay, what do you need? So the key thing is, I suppose, pillar number two was let's upskill what you want. You tell me what you want as a cluster, not as a company. I don't want one company. I want 10 companies. You tell me what you need and we can start developing for that. And I say we, the education providers across the Southeast, not just SETU, but also we have education training boards, ETBs. So between us and other areas and other bodies that provide training and private training providers, we can provide a solution. So we need to cluster and collaborate to provide niche solution for you. So if you're talking about the mission and where it's going, as we laid down our first few pillars at the start, we had a good foundation. We built from there. But our region has changed. Things are changing all the time. There's new developments. There's new government policy coming out. There's new funding coming out for particular areas like sustainability that companies can go after and so on. And we want to support them on that. So yes, we have to move with it as well. So it's very important to have the cluster manager and the steering group connecting with industry continuously. You don't run a cluster from the office. You run a cluster by being on the road and by in with the companies and so on. So listening to them and all the time providing that value, all the time saying, what do you need? What do you want? And what can we do and deliver, or else they'll lose interest. So it is dynamic and it is adaptable, and it has to move with the times. We can't be here saying 10 years ago we decided on that and we're still doing that. It doesn't work. Industry moves too fast. The country moves too fast. So yeah, we have to move with it, and we are moving with it.
Yeah, it certainly seems that way. And I mean, I think Ireland is such an unfortunate example of the brain drain that happens with people not even moving to different regions, but moving to entirely different countries. And to see a cluster like this that is so steadfast in its mission to change that is really, it's great to see. On the continuous connecting within the cluster, obviously you said the engagement can differ between stakeholders involved. What has worked well in building and maintaining that involvement over time? If you could pinpoint any one thing in particular to this approach.
There's a few. So sometimes it depends on the company. You can have a company that is a small SME or a micro company, and there might be 10 people inside in the company, and they can see the value or they see the interest in it. And they will say, you know what, I want in. And you find the director of that company very involved. And it's surprising to see someone, running a whole company on their own, quite involved. And you can have a big, large company with 1,000 people inside it, and they're so busy that they don't get as involved. It really depends on the company and their interests. And that's why the credibility and the value add is important. So you're knocking on the door to say, are you in? Are you interested? What do you need and what you want? You have to have an inside hook. There needs to be someone within the company that wants to do this, someone at a senior level that wants to do this. Because I can go to an engineer working on the floor of a manufacturing company and say, this is great, I love this is brilliant, but I can't get released to do this. So we go to the director. We go to the senior team to say, are you interested in this? And if you are, then you can assign a champion, you can have someone that is connecting in, but you do need to release that person. So the key thing is getting in to the right person within the company. We find that it's funny, the companies sometimes that are smaller can be more engaged. The larger ones, not always, absolutely not always. So there's a mix there. That cluster manager is very important, and that team in the office that's connecting in. But what really helps is providing low-hanging fruit wins. Provide a win at an early stage. So it might be something small. We run a careers day here within the college here where I sit. And the careers day is run where it's for engineering only and it's for members only. So we ran one recently there in October, and we had about 40, 50 companies. And the key thing for the company is recruitment's expensive. And you can go to a lot of open days and kids come in and out and they're interested but not interested. Well, I'm going to bring you down 100 engineers. I'm going to get them CV ready and I'm going to put them in front of you. And when they come down, you have a chance to sell your wares. And if you're a small company and you have other big companies, big names, I won't mention names, but they come in, they swoop because students can say, oh, I know them, they look great, I would love to work for them. But there's a lovely company 2 kilometers down the road, why don't you work for them? I never heard of them, I don't know who they are. It gives them a chance to sell. And what is a huge win is when a smaller company, local company says, I hired a graduate or I hired a work placement student. That's a big win for them when they're in a very expensive recruitment, a noisy recruitment market, because there's such a deficit here. And as you said, brain drain with students leaving as well. They want to go to the bigger cities and they want to move out. It's a real value to that company to say, I got someone. And all I did was turn up for free to a careers day that you put on for me by clustering, if you like. It's a local team approach. So easy wins, low hanging fruit. And once they get early wins, they're going, okay, I like this. This works for me. I'm winning from this. And then they can see, then we bring in bigger projects or something. And an example of a bigger project would be, we might have a big research project and a company say, look, we don't really do research. We'd like to do, but we don't know what it is. And we bring them into the project and we do so slowly and we educate them as they go along. And that to them is a win to say, I'm now part of a multi-stakeholder project with significant funding that's developing a technology for my company. So they're winning from that perspective. So I think that's really important. You know yourself, early wins bring you along.
Exactly. And particularly with getting a graduate involved, like the snowball effect of one person getting a job somewhere and then being a spokesperson for testimonial is, particularly in a country like Ireland where we all love to gossip, I think that it's really crucial. I can definitely see how that is not only a low-hanging fruit, but also win for the future. Maybe in terms of other benefits you've seen across being involved in this cluster, what are some of the benefits you've seen? Any ones that maybe took you by surprise, either for the university or for the region?
For myself, I suppose there's benefits here. If you look at it from why bother, why would I bother? I spoke about industry for quite a while there. What industry get out of it? What do I get out of it? For the careers day, I get my students placed. I have all these students in all these work placement programs and they need to be placed. So they all get placed, which is fantastic. Second thing is when I'm applying for research funding and looking for equipment, capital investment and so on, a lot of the funding will say you need to have industry input into these and you need letters of support and so on. And I find that I can draw on the cluster very quickly. I get you 5 companies, no problem. And they will, and they'll pony up. To be fair, they're very good and very supportive to row in behind you. Another side as well is it makes sure that we're not disconnected. So I know what's going on. I know the technology that they're developing, and you get a sense of if there's changes in the market. So you can be talking to a company, you could be at a steering group meeting or whatever it is, and you'll get a feel for, you know what, that's a little bit out of date. We've moved on since then, and this is what's coming down the line. And for us, especially from an engineering technology perspective, we need to keep our finger on the pulse. And that helps us do that, to know what's coming and what's not. The other side is a lot of industry are involved in our program development. We don't develop a program here without industry input. So once again, the cluster, to be fair, steps up a lot to say, look, I can help you with that. I can help design that. I can be part of that. So they're wins for us. It's a real win-win for us. And that's why we look after it and nurture it and drive it, because we see a huge benefit. And for us as a university, in particular, SETU, our whole strategy is connecting for impact in the region. That is the whole point of it. And this is a great exemplar to say we can do this and we are doing this. It's a case study, if you like, of how it can be done in another discipline area, to be able to call upon 100 companies. It's great to be able to do that and show what we're doing. Yeah, it keeps us real and it keeps us connected.
And you're absolutely right. In a field like engineering, I think there are certain sectors that maybe aren't so hard pressed to always keep their pulse on changes in the market and recent developments, but that's not a fortune you're afforded in engineering. No. So yeah, I can understand that.
Do you want to be a part of a global community where universities, businesses, and public organizations come together to solve the world's biggest challenges? At UIIN, we equip our members with the skills, tools, and strategies they need to create impactful partnerships that drive real-world change. Whether it's upskilling your team, strengthening your institution's partnership efforts, or becoming more entrepreneurial, UIIN empowers you with the knowledge and support you need. Join us today. Visit uiin.org to find the best plan for your organization.
But to the point that everyone always loves to hear about, what are some of the sticking points, some of the challenges you've been faced with, lessons learned, shall we say, framing it in a more positive sense?
Oh, Madeline, it's been fantastic.
Not a single challenge.
No, there's no issues. Absolutely. I think we've been lucky in that we had a really good steering group. And I think if you get people that are really engaged and passionate about it as you are, it's really helpful. And you need to have people that also have influence. There's no point sitting around a table with people that, they're coming in because they're interested, but really there's no influence. Or they can't add value. They can't say, look, I can have a phone call here, or I can check this, and so on. So you do need that. One of the most difficult things is it is relentless. You have to keep going all the time. The cluster managers are very busy. They're very busy people, and they're going and they're connecting all the time. And their experience of being out on the road and even just getting membership paid up and pulling invoices from companies and so on, that kind of day-to-day operational stuff. And I know from the other clusters and speaking with the other education outreach managers, there's been a lot of pain. You can see around the table, we can laugh about it, but there is pain when trying to get people involved and pushing that sometimes rock up a hill. But I think the most important thing, and this has been a really important one, is the longevity of it. A cluster is you'd normally get about 7 years funding for a cluster. It takes time. You seed it, you get to know it, you build trust, you build credibility. People are going 2 or 3 years in, they're still asking the question, do I want to do this or don't want to do this? Do I want to be part of this, and so on. It's not a project. It's a long-term thing. So it's not like a research project 3 years long, SFI funded, isn't it great? Or 4 years long, whatever. Yeah. No, it's not. It's not a project. This is a long-term game. So you do have to have that concept. This is long-term. So we got to get it right at the start. We got to get the governance right. We have to have funding and our own self-financing. It needs to be self-financing and sustainable, and so on. So to be fair to Enterprise Ireland, that we had originally a few years funding. It was extended a year, then it was extended 2 years. And I have to give them that credit. They could see that what 4 years funding does not a cluster make. But now we 7 years funding, and that's been really successful because we have to show the companies, because it's an industry-based cluster. It's not a short-term thing. We're not going to pull out you, and this is a long-term thing. So that's really important, and getting that message out there. Another problem that I see, just myself maybe personally, is other clusters forming, and you can have duplication. So we have this cluster, and then I could hear of another one over here and another one over here. It could be another engineering one or another engineering type one, or there might be announcements from the government, oh, we're going to do new clusters and national clusters, and you're sitting there, there's already 13 of them, they are nationally funded and so on. So it can get noisy, and as a company, you're like, do I go to this one or should I be in this one? FOMO, am I missing out on this, or what is it? So you are trying to demonstrate it's long-term, it's meaningful, and we want you part of it because it should win for you, making sure that we're not duplicating. And that's why when you asked at the very start, it is important for the 13 clusters to work together. And I think if there's another one starting, there'll be others that they're connected as well, because it just becomes a flooded market. Clustering's great. I would encourage more of it. Absolutely. Yep. But it's how it's being managed and the signals it's giving off. And there's only so many companies, and they'll be pulled in different directions. People knocking on the door, hi, will you join mine? And then I think that could be a problem. If you don't have enough of a customer base, Ireland is a small country. From that perspective, it could be difficult. So we're watching the landscape and keeping an eye on it. And at some point, I agree that maybe a cluster can run its course. We talk about long term, but if you're not evolving and meeting the needs and developing and so on, perhaps, maybe you need to totally evolve, or you need to merge with something else to form something different because needs have changed. So it is I suppose it is dynamic.
Absolutely. Gosh, I didn't consider the relentlessness of always having to be competitive on the one hand, but equally to not want to duplicate efforts and differentiate yourself from the others, but also be open to collaborating and learning from one another. I'm sure it's a fine line to tread. And equally, your point about funding and funding cycles and indeed project cycles, I think this is something we hear even in our business group that we had, I want to say 2 weeks ago, we had both members of industry and also some university members of UIN come together to hypothesize about the intricacies of university industry collaboration, and project cycles is certainly one. And I think this is not necessarily a new thought, but just the difference in time horizons, of course, between universities and industry, and how oftentimes funding cycles can exacerbate those differences. So yeah, absolutely. It's great to see that Enterprise Ireland gave such longevity to the cluster. Maybe looking ahead, as we're on the topic of time, how do you see the cluster evolving in the next 5 to 10 years? If you were to hypothesize, what sort of opportunities and challenges lie ahead? If you are in this moment clairvoyant, Frances.
I think what we've seen so far, and one thing we started to do is developing subclusters. So subclustering within the cluster, because engineering in the Southeast is quite a broad area. So we developed some subclusters that we'd like to develop further. One of them is in automation, for example. So we've taken a few automation companies that, once again, wouldn't work with each other, wouldn't know each other, or they might know each other, but they're coming together. And they have developed, most recently, an automation scholarship for students to study automation robotics here in SETU, and that's just been launched. And that's an example of an activity we never thought of. It wasn't something that ever came up before. And it's coming from the industry. So the subclustering is definitely something to develop. And we have 4 or 5, maybe 6 subclusters, but it might be tailoring those and bringing those down to 3 or 4 core areas of focus. With that as well is, and I suppose it's getting funding for those and putting a program of work for each of those clusters and what that looks like. So that was something new that we did. Another one for us at the moment is it's really important and prevalent for us here in the Southeast is the offshore wind sector. So the Southeast of Ireland is gearing itself up for offshore wind, and we have been approved in terms of planning for offshore wind, the DMAPs and so on here in the Southeast. And I'm part of a larger group called the Southeast Offshore Wind Partnership. It's quite unique a name. But together we're working to develop the region and get ready for this new sector that's coming in. So there's a new industry that has never been here before. And my question for the cluster is, how do we get companies to be part of that supply chain? So there's companies going to come in and they'll be looking for welders and parts and widgets and so on. And there's companies within the cluster that have never built anything for that sector. So how do you pivot into that? So it's getting them to pivot, to understand it and so on. And I think that's where the cluster can help in terms of a new sector coming in and getting ready for that. Green sustainability or targets, 2030 targets, they're coming at us fast, but they're really prevalent, and preparing companies for that and for that new sector and for meeting those goals and targets and so on. That's definitely something future for us. So I think it will be, now that we're grounded, we have developed, once again, that back to that credibility, it's tightening up on the subclusters. It is moving in line with government policy and these new offshore wind, in this case, or renewable energy, or in general sense, the green agenda that we're moving towards, working with industry to get them prepared for that. For example, we brought over experts from the Netherlands to train some leaders in the companies in offshore to say, this is what it's about, and doing more of that. And as we advance as well, as SETU, we're only a university a short few years. As we develop and move into our next strategic plan, it's the same concept. What is our next step together? And what I would like to see more of, there is government funding called TU Rise, and that funding specifically for industry research. It's the university, but it's industry research, and we need to advance that. Our research with industry, we're quite strong, but from a cluster perspective, not strong enough. And we do have a resource now. We have an industry research liaison person hired, and their job is to advance that. So what I'd like to see in the next 5 years is a real uplift in the amount of companies within the cluster that are collaborating together on the research and innovation side of things. It might be their core business, but developing technology for themselves and to bring them forward as they innovate. So they will be the 3 things, I think, the subcluster, the new sector, and research, and to put a lift on those over the next few years.
Wow. And Frances, just as you mentioned it, it's astonishing to think that SETU has only been in operation as SETU since 2021?
Yeah, so we're 2022, yeah. So
Yeah.
we're coming up to 3 years. So we've done a lot in a few years, I have to say.
You have. It's really impressive after a merger like that, merging, as you said, across so many counties and
Yeah,
institutions to already find such alignment with industry and in terms of where you see it going. And also, equally, as you said, to be on the forefront of that new sector in offshore wind. Very exciting. And lovely to hear that the Dutch, we're based in
yes.
Amsterdam. We love to hear that the Dutch are involved. They know what they're doing, generally. Maybe, I know we're nearing the end of our chat and I haven't let you rest. I haven't let you have a moment's rest in all of this, but maybe to bring everything we've talked about together, if you had to summarize to someone who's looking to adapt this to their own context, thinks, oh, I would love to set up this kind of cluster approach in my city, in my region. If you had to summarize the success factors of this kind of multi-stakeholder, this level of cluster-based collaboration into, we'll say 1 to 3 takeaways, I'm going to give you the flexibility to choose. What would they be for you?
The success factors, or I think I would call it the essentials.
Yeah.
Yeah, if you want to set something like this up, anyone can set it up, but get ready for a lot of work and energy. And I think if you're going to set something up, you do need to have, if you're going to set it up within the university, for example, if that's what you've decided to do, that's where it's going to start. First things first, on the ground, you need to suss out a lot on the ground. You're talking to different people that you know to have general conversation to see, is this of interest first? You need to float the idea for a little while before you start taking it up the chain about whether we're going to do this or not. So I think it's floating it around and starting those conversations early. The second thing is to get a clear understanding of what clustering is and what you want to do. What is the point of it? Is it just to network or what is it? But what's the point of it? So you need to be clear about what the actual point of it is. And that's where you identify the needs and the pillars at the very start. And you might just do that with 10 or 12 people around the table. It doesn't have to be a big thing. Keep it small, keep it open. Don't be overly prescriptive with it, but be clear. We want to do these 3 things, even if it's just that. Start with that, and then you can start widening it out and inviting people to the conversation. But I think if you start early conversation, have a little bit of floating ideas, have 2 or 3 things about what you want to do, and you meaning the 12 people around the table, not you. You need to hear the industry pain. You need to hear their voice about what they actually need. If it's going to be industry focused, if that's the point, doesn't have to be, that could be the point. And then you're pushing it gently and you're watching it grow and develop. But if you don't have your narrative, you should be able to put a 1-page brochure, like an invitation to a company to say, or an agency, say, I want you involved. They'll read it and say, what is this? Why am I doing this? What is the point of this? Who's running this? And what am I going to get out of this? And if you can't put that on a page, you can't sell it to anyone. You can't bring anyone in, but also you don't know really yourself what you want to do. And I would think it's the worst thing you can do. I know myself, my colleagues have talked about this. The worst thing you can do is go hard, develop, create this big network, get everyone involved, and then drop it. Your credibility as a university, your own reputation, will be tarnished by that. We think, and this is me and my few colleagues when we talk about this, you're building all this up and then you let it go. So that's why it's slowly, carefully. You don't need 100 members. You can have 10. Start with the 10. Do something meaningful. Get some wins out of it. And once they're comfortable and you're rolling along, then bring in another few and another few. So it isn't clickbait and likes and they've got 100 people and all these figures. It's better to have something small with 10 companies or people or stakeholders that get something meaningful out of it rather than having something too big, we feel. But it is long term and you have to demonstrate value for this long term. I know I'm going around the houses and getting you a follow-up. So 3 takeaways. 1, start small, understand what you're going to do. 2, you need good governance. Someone is doing this. Someone's managing it. In my case, I'm the PI, but I work with 2 or 3 of us and together we manage it. Hail, rain or snow, doesn't matter if company's in or out. There's 3 or 4 of us that manage this all the time. I think about this cluster all the time. As PI, I have to. Someone has to manage it. And 3, it needs to bring value to each stakeholder, yourself included. So as a university, I should be able to say to my own president, this is why we're doing this. And they go, I get this. This makes sense. This is fantastic. If I can't do this, why am I doing this? Why are we wasting energy on this? What's the point? And every company the same. So it needs to add value. And if you've those 3 things, you'll go a long way with it. But of course, everything needs money. And
Isn't that the way?
we've talked about it. Would we do if we'd no funding? I know myself and colleagues, we just would. We see it as part of our job. We just do it. But you do need to pay a cluster manager or education outreach officer to actually get on the road. You need an administrator. You need that kind of support. So if you're going to be meaningful, it does have to be self-financing. The same as any business, the same as any organization. You're treating it like that. So.
Frances, before we had this conversation, I didn't think that I'd be setting up a cluster, but I've taken extensive notes and it appears this will be my next career pivot. That was really comprehensive. Thanks so much for giving your time today. We're just about out of time. Frances, for those who are interested, where can they find out more about Engineering the Southeast Cluster, or indeed if they want to get in contact with you?
Yeah, they can look up the website. We have a website, engineeringthesoutheast.ie, and you can also contact our cluster manager or education outreach officer, which is stephen.rooney@setu.ie. And Stephen would be great to talk to, just if you want tips or anything like that, because he's on the ground, he's running it every day, and he could give a different view for what I'm saying. Where I say it's fabulous, he's saying, oh, it's tough. I'm joking. But Stephen, so it's stephen.rooney or OONEY @setu.ie, and you can connect in there, and I can give you details as well if you want to post anything. But we have a website, Engineering the Southeast, and you'll get the detail there, and you'll see the kind of thing that we do. And as I say, look, it's only one of 13 clusters. All of them are fabulous, and if you want to see little differences, we can connect you in with any of the clusters and do an introduction. If you have an area that you're interested in, rather than engineering, something totally different, there are other ones. So we're happy to connect, and they'd be only delighted to have a conversation.
Stephen's going to be overrun with emails now.
Don't tell him I said it.
Thanks so much, Frances, again for your time, and hope to see you again soon. Hope to see you at our conference in Amsterdam this year.
I will be there. We are going to go.
Fabulous. Great.
Thank you. Lovely. Thanks for the chat, and thanks everyone. All the best.
Thanks everyone.
Bye now.
Thank you for listening to the discussion. Follow UIN on LinkedIn, and if you're enjoying our podcasts, make sure to subscribe, rate, and review on your podcast platform of choice to help others find this content too.